Good morning for all of those board members and managers that are logging in. I have the pleasure of here being with Misha from M2E. We're going to give everyone just about a minute or two to get settled in and get all the participants in before we get the webinar started. In today's webinar, we're going to be talking about concrete restoration as well as issues with seawalls. So we're very excited to get today's course started. We'll get started in just about a minute. For those of you that are first time to one of our webinars, feel free to have use the question and answers. We try to make this very free flowing where you can ask any questions or provide any questions that you may have with regards to restoration or with regards to seawall. Both Misha and myself will do our best to answer all the questions, but we do want to make it very interactive. So feel free to put in any questions that you may have. At the end of the webinar, we will provide the contact information for both M2E as well as Affinity Management. So don't worry. If you're not able to take notes, we will also be posting it on our YouTube page, which will share that information at the end of the webinar. And we'll also e-blast it to all of you that are on the webinar today. Again, welcome to the webinar. We're looking forward to getting this started. All right, great. So I like to be punctual in what I say and what I do. So it's 11:02. Again, I want to have the pleasure of here being with Misha, one of the president, I should say, of M2E. So I'm going to give you a little here introduction. Misha's experience in engineering and construction spans for over 30 years. During that time, he has overseen projects ranging from multi-purpose conference halls to luxury condominiums across 3 continents. As the president of M2E, he has led project management, owner representation, and quality control for various multi-million-dollar residential and commercial projects. His hands-on approach to resolving construction issues include defective work or components, delay analysis, and budget disputes. So with further ado, I wanted to introduce Misha. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you very much for having us. It is our pleasure to be at this webinar that your company is organizing, and we look forward to hopefully share some fruitful and useful information with the board members that are on the webinar.
Definitely. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I am the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We are a condominium and homeowner association management company throughout the Tri-County area. We're just that right size, not too big, not too small, just right in that medium sector where we're able to service, those associations that are looking for a bit more of a boutique style management, as well as being able to have the resources that you get from the larger players, but yet have a little bit more contact with the owner and get things done in a quicker pace. So enough about us. I think most of the board members and the managers that are on the call are here to learn a little bit more about seawalls and concrete restoration. So I know we're here walking into hurricane season. And this year, things have changed now. Hurricane season is opening up on May 15th, making our lives as managers and engineers a little more challenging. So I think it would be great to start with the seawall. So Misha, if you kind of give us kind of a high level and understanding of the seawall, how the seawall works, what are the components that managers and board members alike should be concerned about or should be looking at. If you can kind of give us from an engineering perspective that information. I do have here a slide that you shared that you'd like to share, and I'll go ahead and post it up so that our listeners can see it and you can kind of go over it. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rafael.
No problem.
A seawall is a wall that protects you from the sea. In essence, it is both a component that prevents the soil to wash into the sea and for the sea to come on the other side of the wall. The wall typically has 2 essential components, which is the seawall panel. The seawall panel is either made out of concrete or sometimes out of steel, and it is essentially the vertical component of the seawall. The seawall has a cap, which is typically done out of concrete, which is wide enough that you can actually walk on it. And that seawall cap is anchored back with a tie-back rod to what is called a dead man, which is essentially a belt and suspender structural component that prevents the seawall to tilt if exposed to the pressure of an upcoming ocean or sea. The reason why I wanted to have this graph is because often we are asked, as Rafael said it, well, what should I do, or how would I know that my seawall is not working well? The only thing that you can see from the top, so to speak, is to see whether your seawall cap is in good condition. So signs of rust that would come through the seawall cap, or elements of what we call spalling, which is essentially where the concrete is separating from the structure itself, would be signs that the seawall cap is not in good condition. But what about the seawall panels? Well, if a seawall panel is not in good condition, as you can see from here, the earth or soil on the right-hand side of this, which is the brown surface that you see, would eventually wash into the sea. And that way, that would cause erosion on the right-hand side of the seawall. What does erosion mean? Erosion is where water takes away soil so that soil starts to collapse. So what you would see at the surface of the soil component would be essentially holes forming and voids forming. And you would go and say, what happened? Where did the soil go? Well, the soil actually washed into the sea because the seawall did not retain it properly. We are often asked to go on waterfront properties where people see that there is significant amount of wash off directly on or around the seawall cap, and they go, well, I have really no idea where this earth went, and we just peek on the other side of the seawall cap and see that there is a tremendous amount of sediment on the other side of the seawall, and essentially that's where it went. Why is that an issue? Because your other structural component, whether it is a home or it is a condominium, count on the seawall to act as a barrier between the soil on one side and the sea level on the other side. If you lose enough soil, let's say simple case, if it is a single home, if you lose enough soil on the side of a single home, you would essentially wash off the basis of where the foundation of that wall is done. In the case of a condominium, you would not lose the base of your foundation, assuming that you're on piles, but what you will have is voids that would represent issues from the standpoint of tripping hazard or lack of use of the space beyond the seawall cap. That's kind of a 10,000 feet overview, Rafael, and I didn't want to get too technical. That's why I get this overly simplified thing so that everybody knows what I'm talking about.
No worries at all. I mean, we definitely don't want to lose our viewers. So I want to express, and get your understanding of the importance of maintaining a seawall. I know the discussion yesterday that we were having prior to the webinar, we were chit-chatting about some of the challenges, let's say from a management perspective, where the seawall, it's not something that owners, see. It's not something that they appreciate, just because, again, most of the, as you said, that bulkhead or the seawall head, it's something that people just believe is just a slab of concrete. They don't understand how important the sheet metals that are there or the pilings that are there, the maintenance and inspection of them. I know in my own experience where we've taken on certain properties where you'll find different deficiencies, where you'll find that the soil, it's either kind of like a manhole where we're starting to sink in, where it's evident that you're having a seawall issue. If you can kind of talk a little bit, Misha, about the importance and what are the tips that you recommend as an engineer, what associations should be doing, how often should they be, let's say, checking or inspecting their seawalls? And you mentioned about spalling, maybe go a little bit deeper as to, like, for those managers of what a spalling is, so they can kind of open their eyes when they're inspecting the property.
Let me start with that. That's an easy one. uh, concrete is held together with steel, which is called steel reinforcement. But concrete is not impervious. In other words, salt from the air and water eventually does get through concrete. And when that salty, humid component gets in contact with the steel rusts. And when steel rusts, steel expands, essentially pushing the concrete away from it. It starts with cracks, but if the cracks are not dealt with in time, cracks form on both sides of the steel, and eventually the steel pushes away the concrete, where the concrete separates from the steel that reinforced it. When that separation occurs, that's what spalling is.
Okay.
Now back to maintenance. I know this is not an aesthetic item or a sexy item that boards. It's not something that is used, I'm going to say, on a regular basis, so to speak. To spend money on the renovation of a lobby or something that would provide better impact or more important impact. The only thing that I would like to say is I always talk about buildings being essentially the same like human beings. Exercise and have a good diet, and then go for a long time without having to go for a major surgery. Or you can have an unhealthy diet, sit in a couch for all of your life, and by the time that you see that something is wrong with a coronary issue, a building is no different. In other words, there is proper ways of maintaining somebody, keeping it in shape, so to speak. So what does that mean for a seawall? The sooner that you find that there is an issue, the less expensive the repair goes. If you have just a puncture or a small problem with the actual sheet piling or pile cap, it can be a localized intervention that can prevent or at least slow down the further decay. But if you have multiple sinkholes on the side of your seawall, then there is no, I'm going to call it cheap solution to that problem, because you are talking about excavating the building side of the seawall, essentially either repouring it or repairing it through a significant prevention. So, you know, the old announce of prevention applies to building components as well,
Yep.
even when they're not your favorite building component, like a seawall.
Correct. No, excellent point. And, you know, I'm excited. We already have some questions, and I want to kind of jump already into the questions because they relate directly with what you're talking about. I have a question here from Mark, and Mark asked, what kind of protection should be used to keep salt marsh from introducing into the foundation of the condo building?
For introducing what?
Yeah, it's saying what kind of protection should be used to keep salt marsh, is what they put, from being introduced into the foundation of the condo building.
I'm sorry, it could be that my internet or your internet is, but it is coming kind of through an echo. So I apologize once again if you could repeat the question.
Sure. I'm going to go into another one here that I think it relates a little bit more to what we're talking about here, which is, what is the average life of a seawall? I have a question here from Manuel Rodriguez.
What is the average life expectancy?
Yes, of a seawall.
The seawall should typically have a life expectancy of a building, but the life expectancy is a statistical value. Essentially, that means it's the average of the average of the average. You can say that the life expectancy of a Versailles is 75 years, but it's here, what, another, 500 years later. Is because it's being maintained at a completely different rate than a condominium. A statistical value of the life expectancy reinforced concrete, but that doesn't mean that 55 years plus 1 day is going to crumble.
Correct.
It's just a statistical value. So I always want people to be kind of cautious, because that depends on the quality of the construction and whom did the seawall and how well did they did it, because that would impact it too. At the while you can use a rule of thumb that it should essentially live up to its life expectancy, pick a number. Again, it's a statistical number: 35, 25, 45.
Yeah.
It would be important to know, because you know that from our experience in 40 years of certifications, we have buildings have been properly. You have other buildings where we have to go through multi-million-dollar renovations because nothing was done in the building for 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in this case, being vigilant as to the first sign of stress, and having, let's say, every 5 years, every 10 years, somebody take a look at it, both from the building side and from the wet side. Today you have structural engineers that are certified divers that would actually take it a look, and at that point you can prevent it from becoming a much graver problem.
Correct. No, you bring up an excellent point, because it's like everything else in life. And I think that analogy that you use of comparing it to a human, it's on point. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, then how long can you expect that seawall to maintain itself? And there's so many impacts that are hitting, seawalls. You have hurricanes. Is your seawall being used as a dock as well? So there's added pressure to that seawall by having that weight being pushed onto it, or going back and forth, being bumped constantly when the tides are going up and down. I mean, these are kind of logical things for our boards and managers that you should have front of mind. I know that, being a board member is no easy task. No one wants to raise fees. No one wants to expend any money. You want to keep things status quo. But the reality is that running any business, there needs to be preventative items, maintenance done, as well as investments into the business. So it's very important for our board members and our managers that are listening, that you're contacting your engineer and having that seawall checked on a regular basis, whether it be a program that you're doing every 5 years, or before or after a major storm. You want to make sure that you have some kind of plan in place. Have a chat with either M2E or whoever your partner is, and let them put together a plan for you, because we need to rely on our professionals. A lot of times, what are your thoughts as a manager on the seawall? While we may be good at a lot of things, there's certain things that we're definitely not the experts at, and we need to rely on our experts. I have here another excellent question, and I know this may be an attorney response that it depends, but I have here a question of what's like an estimate to repair a seawall. Manuel, again, has a seawall that's about 126 linear feet. They need some TLC. I'm sure it depends on a lot of things, but what's like, let's say, a worst case scenario and kind of like a best case scenario to repair a seawall, or, if you can kind of give our audience an idea.
Sure. There is, unfortunately, there is no magic number. And the reason is it just the cap, or is it the cap and the wall? If the wall is concrete, if the wall is sheet piling, is it just a puncture, or is it a structural failure? So a little TLC is kind of very broad description. There is no substitution for the eye of an expert. So I'm not trying to deflect the question, but the difference of pricing is so dramatic that if I give worst case scenario and I scare Manuel, although he may only have a problem with the cap, or if I give him an average of an average number and yet his wall is collapsing, both ways I'm going to end up being looking like ignorant, which is why even a look-see from the outside, even not going on the wet side, would give us an idea of what it would be. So what I would recommend is for an engineer to get a look-see. At that point, he will know at least what we call the mode of failure. How bad is it, or how good is it? So that at that point you can say, this is the bracket that you may have as far as repair cost.
Okay. I have another question here from Bernard, which I think has to do maybe with the maintenance side of it, but how do property owners protect against sinkholes on their property? And I would say we should relate it maybe to seawalls, but either way, if you can kind of go into elaborate on that.
A sinkhole for somebody who doesn't know, you have spontaneous sinkholes, and there is nothing you can do to protect it because it's essentially part of the substrate on which your property is built. You have underground water that erode the substrate of where a certain structure is done, and when they erode enough on it, then you have a catastrophic failure of the soil by sinkholes forming. So those are just part of nature, and there is nothing you can do for it. The sinkholes that we are talking about, which is sinkholes that are erosion caused as a result of seawall failure, are preventable, because if your seawall function as it should, then you shouldn't have them.
Correct.
So what do you do about it? If it is seawall related or controlled erosion related, there is something you can do. If it is just natural, if you're in West Kendall and you get a sinkhole, there is no seawall that will help you.
Yeah. Yeah, correct. Total sense. I have a question, interesting question here from David. How about iguanas affecting seawalls?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I believe that they burrow, but there is no material. I never heard of iguanas going into concrete. It could be very, 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 very strong iguanas. But I have not in my career seen any collapse or structural failure that were iguana caused.
Excellent. Great. We want to make sure we're getting the participation of all of our individuals. We have here from Riverbend, why are major underwriters not insuring seawalls?
Typically, when insurance step away from something is because they can't control the risk.
Correct.
And I hate to go back to what we started the discussion with, is they don't want to insure something that they can't control the maintenance of. We're involved sometimes as experts in lawsuit where the insurance company just insured a condominium for, let's say, $30 million, only for the condominium to have major failure during a hurricane, and that defeats kind of them asserting that it was just hanky-dory for 30 million, but at least that's something that they can see. Insurers, appraisers don't have typically the knowledge to be able to define how bad your seawall is doing, and they don't like to buy risk that they can't control.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and it makes total sense what you said, Misha. I mean, same thing goes with there's certain other items that are not covered in insurances, and I think you just can't control it. You have the same thing with landscaping. While they're two totally different things, you know, they can't control those, and that's probably why it's not covered. We see it in our associations that do have seawalls. You know, those seawalls are not covered. So that goes to show the importance of maintenance, in my opinion. Because as Misha may have not been able to drill down on a number, and we ourselves have seen a big range of what repairs can look like, I think the range really depends on the lack of maintenance is the way I see it. If you're regularly if you have a plan in place of inspecting the seawall, then you're going to find yourself in a much better position, and that useful life will hopefully be much longer than if just kind of ignoring it. And I think Misha said it best, is not that sexy, but you're paying attention to it. It's going to make your life as a board member and a manager much easier, and avoid having a major expense of having to repair it completely. I have a great question here from Hugo, and I think this may have to do as well with, you know, what's impacting South Florida, which is, you know, sea level rise and so forth. Hugo has a question here that says, is there any requirement regarding the minimum concrete cap, let's say for Miami-Dade, like the height of that concrete cap?
I do not know of one that is a minimum. It needs to conform to what the FEMA requirements to control flooding. So depending on the area that you are with, it is part of the design procedure to design that cap. Because different areas have different approach to it, and it will be part of the design criteria when somebody designs your seawall.
Correct. Yeah, makes total sense. So why don't we switch gears here again? Kind of going on halfway of the webinar. I want to switch gears into the restoration side of things.
There was just one question from Manuel that I saw.
Sure.
When he said how long the seawall should be inspected, how long, or I guess what are the frequency that you need to have getting inspected by a professional contractor, I would just like to say not a professional contractor, it should be a professional engineer.
Engineer, yeah.
Because if you get the contractor to take a look at it, he will find something wrong. Because he doesn't make money from the inspection, he makes money from the repair. Whereas an engineer really doesn't care whether you repair it or not, he wants to tell you the truth, and he'll tell you the truth, whether it's good or it's bad. So my recommendation will be, whenever you have your repaint job, which is 5 to 7 years, take a look at it. That look-see is not that expensive, and it will give you peace of mind.
Excellent. And you know what? That's a great question to segue into the restoration side of things. So, you know, we've seen boards where they're trying to do things on their own, and there's a restoration project, and they're contacting a contractor to give them a proposal or give them an idea of where the building stands. If you'd be so kind to walk us through what your recommendation is for managers and boards that see some spalling. Again, spalling is where you're seeing that rust and the concrete separating itself. Or you're walking into a 40, 50, or 60-year restoration if you're in Miami-Dade or Broward County. Kind of give our managers and our board members, what's your recommendation when you're walking into a restoration project? Should you contact the contractor? Who should you contact, and what are the steps that should be taken?
Our recommendation is for you to first select an engineering firm. And I know it sounds redundant because I own an engineering firm, but we're also a forensic engineering consultant, and essentially that means that we're the emergency room of construction, and we are called when some things go awfully bad. So from my now 40+ years of experience in this business, I can tell you, it doesn't have to be my firm, but get a good engineer. And a good engineer is not always, is never the cheapest one. How about that?
Yeah.
So I'll get to why that is the way it is, but why first the engineer and not the contractor? The engineer is a licensed professional, and as such, we are licensed because of our ability to hurt the public if we don't act in a professional manner, right? You are licensed, Rafael. We are licensed. Attorneys are licensed because we are interacting with the public, and our services are likely to hurt the public if they are not performed in a professional manner. So you should hire a professional engineer with experience in this type of work, because he should give you an unbiased opinion of where you stand. Do not attempt to do this on your own. I'm currently involved in a condominium who is at the third board, who after 2 attempts to do it by themselves, essentially spend the money that they raised in the special assessment. And after spending all of it, they are 60% complete and they don't know what went wrong.
Wow.
So the reason why the engineer is because the engineer, by the profession that we practice, is unbiased. We will tell you the truth, whether it is a good truth for you or a bad truth, but it will be the truth. And at that point, you can intelligently plan how you're going to tackle it. So when we talk about spalling, or if you talk about certifications, Rafael, we recommend not to wait until 40 years for your 40 years of certification, or not 50 years for your 51, because if there is something that needs to be done, you are against the clock, because depending on the municipality that you're in, you can actually be fined for not filing your 40 years of research in time. We recommend that between 3 to 5 years before those, you hire an engineer who will have a proper conditional assessment of the entire community and give you what he believes or she believes is wrong, and what the estimate is that the repair would cost. That will give you ample time to either raise funds, to budget properly, and to start in time, and to also have an opportunity to bid competitively, that to contractors who will then know exactly what they need to do, and which will not expose you to future change orders, because the actual work will be properly scoped and controlled.
Correct.
There is
Yeah.
even, so that's kind of the main thing, the first thing that you should do.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, that's the practice that we follow here. And again, I want to stress what Misha said. Whoever you decide to go with, you should be going through the same process that you're going with anyone else. You know, reaching out to 1, 2 engineers. Keep in mind, in our industry, a lot of times, you know, they believe you have to have 5, 6, 7, whatever the decision is that you and your board make. We are professionals, but you should be dealing with a professional, because you will see a big range, especially with engineering firms. But you want to make sure you're working with a strong, reputable firm that has a strong presence in the market, such as M2E, and that way you can get proper guidance. Because many times in our experience, where we've taken on certain properties, we have seen exactly what Misha has seen, where they went with someone that was the lowest bidder, and all of a sudden you're having change orders left and right. That means more engineering inspections, more cost, and it's a big challenge for associations and managers alike to have to manage situations such as that. So with the restoration, why don't we start with something basic? Let's say they have their building, right? You're going into, maybe not into a 40-year. We can touch on that a little bit later. But I know one of the things that we recommend to our board members when we're on a new site, or even if we're managing the current property, is we believe that the paint is very important, and it's kind of the skin and what protects the buildings. From an engineering perspective, can you give our audience an understanding of the importance of the paint? What are the impacts in the choices that they're making and the type of paint that they select for the building? If you can kind of go into that. I see that smile. I'm excited to hear your answer there.
Well, again, whenever I do these webinars, I'm trying to make it as less technical as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the simple answer is the quality of paint. The single factor that defines the quality of a paint is its ability, its thickness, to be applied in one single application. In other words, if you apply paint number 1 and it is this much thick, and you apply paint number 2 and it is twice as thick, then paint number 2 is twice better than paint number 1. Why? Paint gets eaten up between UV from the sun, the particle of salt that are carried in the air because we live in South Florida, and the water that washes it away. Any paint eventually gets eaten up. The more that the weather has to eat through, the better the paint. So we often brought and they say, listen, we have in our condo docs that we should repaint every 5 to 7 years or something like that. However, the paint failed 2 years later or 3 years later. The answer to that question is, did you buy a 5-year paint? Because not every paint is a 5-year paint. And the cheaper the contractor, the better the probability that he will dilute some of that paint as he applies it, make it then a 2.5-year paint. In other words, there is no free lunch. So what we do as engineers is we control not only what product is applied, but how it's applied over the building. We check the millage of the application to be sure that not only what we specify is applied, but the way that it's supposed to be applied. Your building skin, which is what we call the envelope or the skin of the building, is comprised of 3 elements. The structure element, which is typically either concrete block or poured concrete, then the stucco on it, and then the paint over it. That together forms the envelope. So substrate plus stucco plus paint equals envelope. That's the skin of your building. And it's no different than your own skin, back to the analogy to human, right? If you treat your skin well, and then it will not break up and get easily scratched or hurt. In the case of the building, the application and quality of the stucco and the paint are important, because first you have the substrate. So if the concrete is properly poured or does not have any cracks that are telegraphing through the stucco, then you're good. Then the stucco protects the concrete and the concrete block, but the stucco is porous too.
Correct.
So the paint is really your only waterproofing element
Mhm.
And what stucco does is, in case that paint is breached, it will slow the progress of water in reaching the structural element. But each of those components has its role within the envelope of the building.
Correct. And that goes to show the importance, right, of something as simple as paint, of what it has. I have a question here from Russell that he asked, how many layers of paint can one have before you need to strip the paint off down to the concrete?
It depends on the quality of the paint. Your building is typically pressure washed before it gets painted.
Correct.
And the reason is, if there is loose paint, nobody's going to scrape down to concrete if there is paint that is adhering that you need to take a hammer to remove it. But that's why you do typically a cleaning or pressure cleaning of the building that is about to be painted to verify the quality and the adherence of the previous coat of paint.
Correct.
What you will find though is you're almost thinking about the coat of paint that is almost like an elastomeric, like a rubbery. But what we see often is that the paint is chalky. So if you put your hands on your paint and your hand ends up being full like of talcum powder, your paint is shot. There is no
Yeah.
more paint no more.
So it's Misha, it's funny you said that, because sometimes when we go a bid on properties, my business development manager or myself will put my hand on the thing and I go, it's time to paint your building. You're way past it.
Yeah.
So I started with the paint. Actually, you know what? Let's answer Julia's question here. Is how long should we expect paint to last, and then we'll go into the next thing.
Properly specified and applied paint should last around 5 years facing the water or in direct waterfront exposure or semi-direct. So if you're on Miami Beach, you're that, or
Correct.
close to the bay or close enough to the bay. If you go further west, you should last around 7 years. Properly specified and properly applied paint.
Correct. And also keep in mind, you know, I'm not an engineer, but I do have an engineering background. So I understand the concepts that Misha's speaking about. Also, you have to understand the pigmentation, you know, what color you're painting, that does change as well, the impact that the sun has to the type of paint. So as a board, you don't have the right to just change colors outright. You do have to take a vote. I should say you should review your documents first, speak to an attorney, a professional there, but either way, most likely any changes, it will require some kind of vote in order to do so. So let's go into the associations, which, you know, in some cases, it may be most that don't paint the building with the frequency that they should. They find themselves in a different position where you're getting spalling, where you're getting damages. What are the steps that an association, a board, or management should take in order to start getting bids, because they're seeing cracking, they're seeing the stucco kind of, you're seeing gator cracks throughout the stucco, you're seeing issues. What's the normal protocol you would recommend for a manager and a board to take?
You need to have a representative sample of the actual condition of the building, because we saw this swing both ways. We were actually hired in a condominium in Key Biscayne where the previous engineer was estimating that the cost of the concrete reno was going to be $2 million. And there was not a lot of units, but what we recommended to the board is to actually allow us to inspect enough units to get what we call the statistically significant sample. And at the end, they actually asked us to inspect all the balconies. What happened is that the previous engineer looked at the balconies that the people complaining the most about spalling was, which were the 3 or 5 worst case scenario. Yeah. And they projected that worst case scenario to the entire building, resulting in a $2 million.
Wow.
Once we did the actual observation that we did, which was, and we got paid to, I'll give you just the actual values because I know them by heart. It was like $23,000, $24,000 to do the inspection for all of the balconies. It was not a big building. But we found out that the actual cost is going to be $1.2 million because you spend $20,000 to save $1 million, right?
Correct.
And we finished on time and on budget.
Yeah. And you know what? We try our best to push our boards to do those kinds of inspections. Like you said, look at that difference. You're talking about an $800,000, $20,000 investment to save yourself $780,000, $770,000. You know, because again, this is the difference with the partners that you get, especially on the engineering side. And it's not just because Misha's here with me. It's just the sheer reality of the situation. When you're dealing with concrete restoration and whatever had occurred, the past is the past. You know, we need to move forward. We need to repair the building, do what your fiduciary duty as a board and a manager is, which is get the building whole. The right thing to do is not just do a regular basic inspection. Because at the end of the day, if you have a taller building, what the engineers are going to be doing are scoping it with binoculars, or high-tech firms like M2E will use drones. But at the end of the day, you're not getting a real analysis of what's going on. Sometimes, you know, you get the bill from the engineer and they're, oh, well, I'm not going to spend that, but you're looking at things short-sighted. Once there's no way you can beat the engineer up if they start to tap and start taking stucco off and they see more rebar that's damaged. There was no way they were able to see that when they were standing on the floor, and that was on the 14th floor. So, you know, there's things you can do, inspecting all the balconies, maybe having them install swing stages so they can do their inspections pre-hand and really get very close to what the repairs are going to look like. And that's going to save you thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the size of your property, by doing that properly.
I think for board members, they need some clarity about what the business proposition of engineering firms is. There is different business models. Our is, because of the reputation and girth that we have, we don't have the luxury of having, I'm going to call it bad press, if you want to call it that way. But you can very well go and say, listen, board members, I'll go and I'll take a look-see at your building for, pick a number, $2, $3, $5, $7, $10,000. And I use binoculars, to use your analogy. And based on my binoculars, I think that you have a, pick a number, $1 million problem. The work starts. And more importantly, you just assessed your condominium for $1 million worth of work, right? And the contractor is selected and the work starts and you burn through the million so quickly and you didn't even finish 30, 40% of the building. What are your options? Your option is to stop in a half-stripped, half-demolished building, which the engineer who gave you the low ball knew when he started, which the contractor who scoped it based on his low ball knew, because now what you're going to do? Change contractors and engineers? No, Correct. You're going to go back to your membership and assess them. And by the time that you tabulate this at the end of the project, you'll find out that he's going to cost you the same amount that the other engineer who told you the truth at the beginning told you. And at the same time, instead of having to go twice to assess, or 3 times in some cases, your association, you would have known the real number at the beginning.
Correct.
That's the difference.
Correct.
There is no free lunch. You will not get $3 million worth of work for $2 million. You will not get $3,000 worth of engineering work for $2,000. And if you believe you will, then you will find yourself in the very position that Rafael and I described.
Correct. Correct. It's better to pay now than to have to pay later with interest and everything else that it comes with. I know taking a more proactive approach and taking that kind of approach, you have much more success. It's easier to bear that news once, deal with it, and stay within the project guidelines or the project timelines, than have to deal with that later. You're dealing with it 2 or 3, as you said, even in some cases 4 times. So you know, as a board, it is your fiduciary duty, and as a manager to do what's right for the condominium itself. And sometimes it comes with difficult decisions, but as a leader of the community, you know, you're there to make the difficult choices and the right choices for your community. I have a question here from Jeff, which is kind of going back a little bit into the paint. Is there like a better paint that works better in cooler temperatures, summer, hot, humid conditions, and so forth?
No, there's just good paint and bad paint.
Yeah, and bad paint. Yeah.
You can have, you know, the BASF's paint on the top of that, all the way to different components. But essentially, engineers know, and engineers will give you a choice with, if he is honest, an actual life expectancy of the paint. So this is a 5-year paint, this is a 3-year paint, this is a 7-year paint, what do you want?
Correct. So let's go into the stage of the project itself. So we hired an engineering firm or M2E to do our inspections. They scope it out. They help us put together the RFP. We bid this project out. We select the contractor. What are the steps that a good engineering firm is going to follow once the contractor has been selected? Because I know it just doesn't end there. If you can kind of give what are your professional recommendations of the next step? Because now the contractor comes on site. What do you recommend from an engineering perspective?
I think it segues. Ali Wood from Central Florida has a question about engineers in very close relationship with concrete companies.
Which is a great question. Mm-hmm.
Wink, wink, wink. First, let me tell Ali that there is an M2E office in Orlando. So I can tell you that office is in no connection with concrete contractor, because it would be a violation of our professional oath and code of ethics. The best way would be to have an engineer who would give you of 2 to 3 contractors and an opinion, not whom to choose, but what are the components of the bids of those contractors. So the selection of the contractor, the way that we do it, is we have a walkthrough with a select number of qualified contractors, and let's say there is 5 of them. We just draw a line, let's say past the first 3, and we explain why we don't recommend number 4 and 5. And it is the business decision of the board to choose any of the 1 to 3s. And we will explain to them the experience, good and bad, that we had in each of them in previous projects. There is no substitution for mileage. There is not that many contractors who do this type of work. And if you talk to a reputable engineering company, they dealt with them before.
Correct.
So one of the questions to ask your engineer is, did you deal with this contractor before? Mm-hmm. But also ask him, did you deal with that other contractor before, and that other contractor? Because if the only contractor or predominant contractor that engineer has selected over the years is contractor X, then there might be a feeling of foul play as to what was actually going on. Because yes, we know all of the horror story of the kickbacks. Whether it's a kickback to an engineer or a kickback to a board member, those horror stories exist in our business, unfortunately. I'm proud to say that we were not ever even remotely accused of such a behavior, because, as I said, because of our reputation and a space we occupy in the marketplace, we can't really afford it. So choice of contractors, and I have to tell you the bad news that in today's environment, everybody is incredibly busy. So one that pushed the prices up because qualified personnel is difficult to find on the contractor side. And also the time that they will be able to start is being pushed because of the availability of manpower. That being said, there is still capable contractors. There is no perfect contractor, there is no perfect engineer. And it boils down to how it is controlled. That's a very long-winded beginning of an answer to your question, Rafael. I don't know what other engineers do. I can tell you what we do. How do you control your contractor is by being essentially present in the site and showing him that you have independent records of the amount and quality of work that is performed. Our engineers are on the swing stage with the contractor the first time when they go and they map the area to be treated. Let's say separating stucco, spalling, spray paint the area, and right there on the stage, we agree on what that surface is. 3 square feet, 5 square feet, 4 linear feet of concrete, 2 linear feet of rebar, whatever it is. Once he starts removing that, we go a second time on the swing stage. And we confirm that he removed only what we told him to remove. What happened at that point sometimes is that it covers other things that we couldn't see until that was removed. So then we modify and we say, okay, this is not 4, this is really 6 feet, because when you start knocking on the stucco, another chunk developed.
Mhm.
Then he does his repair. We are now a third time, and we confirm the as-built condition that he did not repair anything that was not previously mapped. He signs that document, the contractor. So when the requisition for payment comes for the stucco part and demo part, there is no unknown. We know exactly every square foot and every linear foot of material that was removed and put back on the building. And we go a fourth time when the paint is applied to be sure that it's properly applied. And until we are satisfied with the quality, so that you don't look at the zebra, but the building, they don't get approval. And sometimes we go back to be sure that it's done the right way. So there is no surprises. Essentially, we know at the end of every drop, we make the sum of all of this square footage of stucco, of all the linear footage of spalling, of everything that needs to be done. Those should be reflected in the requisition for payment, and not a foot more, not an inch more, not a pound more.
Correct. Good point, Misha. I mean, it's so important to have, you know, that third party or independent party, I guess I should say, doing that. Again, you know, coming from the management side, you know, we get pushed a lot, and we understand we're managing nonprofits, right? There's not excess cash flow. But at the end of the day, that's really not our responsibility. I mean, we need to count on our project managers, on our engineers to supervise that work, because again, we're not experts of what's the right way of cleaning out that rebar and then reapplying. What's the chemicals that need to reapply to that rebar for the stucco to stick, or whatever the application may be. So it's very important, because if you don't have that supervision, look at it this way. How do we know if the contractor did 700 square feet compared to 70 square feet? It's almost impossible. And also when it comes to signing off of the checks, because each party, the engineer signing off, the contractor signing off, we also have in the case where the engineer signs off, letting us know, listen, you're good to go to make this next 15% payment. So they'll sign depending on what gets decided earlier on in the project. If it's A1As, whatever it may be, the engineer will be signing off on that, giving that confidence to the board and the manager to go ahead and release payment because X percentage of the project has been done. We have a question here from Mendoza, which is what do we do if the board makes stupid decisions? And there's the reality of it is that your choice as a board member, or it sounds like you're not a board member, but a member, is really to, if you believe that the board is making the incorrect decision, let's say it that way, then your option is really to either get them off the board and get individuals that are a little bit more competent. I'm sure, Misha, I know I would say that we've had to deal with that many times. We don't take it personal because it's part of the business. We have to handle ourselves in a professional manner. But ultimately, as Misha has said multiple times, and I'll say again, you know, we don't make the decisions. We work on your behalf. We're going to tell you what we recommend. We're going to tell you what's the right thing. But ultimately, the board is the one that's driving your organization. So from a management perspective, that's the importance of making sure that you're paying attention during the election process. So Misha, we're getting close to our time, but I do want to kind of go a little bit deeper into that project. So we've already spoken about hiring the engineer to get the RFP done. We've spoken about getting the engineer with the contractor to supervise the project. Now, let's say when we're wrapping up the project, is there anything that our boards and management should be keeping front of mind when we're wrapping up the project? And like, let's talk a little bit maybe about warranties and how do those warranties apply? If you can kind of give them a little bit high level. I know you can't go into much detail because it depends, but if you can kind of giving that in the wrap up.
You need to be sure, well, what we call this process is the closeout of the project. So there will be representations of warranties from the contractor and from the manufacturer of your paint. You need to be sure to get those in writing. And you need to be sure that, for example, tricks of the trade. A paint will give you a certain warranty if it's been applied by what they call an approved applicator. In other words, your contractor has to be trained and approved by that brand to apply their paint. Be sure that that's the case. That's something that engineers always verify, but be sure that that representation is clear so that there is no discussion if it is a material failure of the paint, that the paint manufacturer will come to the table. Be sure that during the actual course of the project, the rep for the paint manufacturer is also present at the site and blesses not only the applicator, but the way that the thing is applied, so that you have an understanding that there is a clear no way out for the paint manufacturer to get out of his warranty obligations. As far as the contractor, the best recommendation I can have is be sure that he exists for more than 2 or 3 or 5 years. Talk to whomever they did business before with, specifically boards, because you want to be sure that if there is a call for a warranty call, that you don't get a busy signal at the end of the phone because he just went out of business. Concrete restoration and paint is actually could be a thriving business, and a lot of people have in it. We have, as I said, being exposed to most of the players in the game, so we know that depending on what their attitude going into a project is, what is the proper way to manage them. But be sure to check references and be sure to that they still have their license in full effect and all that good stuff that you would have. If you take all of that, your engineer at the closeout will essentially give you back both a proof that the contractor who applied the paint was an approved applicator, that it was applied according to the manufacturer's recommendation. As such, both the warranty of the contractor and the manufacturer will be in effect at the completion of the job.
Correct. And if I can add to that, it's very important that you're obtaining the documents that are providing that, whether it be from the manufacturer or wherever the warranty is coming from. It's making sure that you have those documents and also making sure that you're scanning them. I know it sounds, ridiculous to say that nowadays, but having those documents are very important, because if you don't have those documents, later it can be a challenge to try to get the warranties done, or I should say whatever warranties need to be applied, getting them applied. So we're getting here to the top of the hour. I wanted to personally thank you, Misha, for doing the webinar with us. It's always a pleasure having you on. I know that there's certain questions that we weren't able to get to, but I do want to be respectful of board member and manager's time. We did say the webinar would be within an hour. I wanted to thank Stephanie from your team for making the webinar happen. I wanted to thank Ashley as well from our team. Are there any closing remarks that you would like to provide to our board members and managers that are on the call?
I'm not going to do closing remarks. I actually scrolled through the unanswered questions, so I'm going to use 1 minute to answer.
Sure.
A rapid fire, a couple of them. Russell, cathodic protection stops but doesn't reverse corrosion. So for specialized application, it is a good idea. I saw it proposed several times in condominiums, but not often, or not in my experience, recently implemented. So cathodic protection is essentially applying electrical surface fields to steel in order to prevent further corrosion, but it doesn't reverse it. So if it is bad, you can just keep it bad, just make it not go worse. So if it is to the point where you would want to consider it for preserving it in the future, it is kind of an expensive proposition. The other question was, what paint do you recommend for finish? I'm an engineer, so I don't have favorites, but BASF has a product that is outstanding, that is, of course, quite costly, but has in the field proven quite good. There is other products from other manufacturers that are equally good, which are national manufacturers. So the gradient of how better BASF is versus the other one, versus the increase in price, is something that you may want to consider. And then time of year to paint, not during rain season, because it's not really the rain that is bothersome, it's the wind that goes with it. And for safety purposes, you cannot swing building past certain wind exposure. So hurricane season / rain season. Rain season is okay, hurricane season, be careful.
Yep.
We actually have projects that started during hurricane season because people say, well, there was no hurricane for 3 years. So there, as far as atmospheric thing, sun, no sun, rain, no rain, paint doesn't care.
And if I can kind of add that one as a rapid fire as well, as in your negotiations with your contractor, is make sure that you understand what the demobilization cost is going to be and what it's going to look like should a hurricane hit, because you can be surprised with additional expenses because they are going to need to remove swing stages. They are going to need to remove certain items. So make sure that you understand what that cost looks like so you could squeeze it into your budget if you're doing it during hurricane season.
And my closing statement is very simple. It doesn't have to be us, but be sure to get somebody to watch your back. And a quality engineer is well worth its fees. We see it over and over again, not only by being that engineer, thankfully, but a lot of time by getting into litigations where all of the problem caused by a not so great engineer ended up costing not only money, but delay and heartache as a result of it. So be careful, that's all.
Excellent. So for all of those here, we had some people asking, how could we see this video again? How could we reach Misha's firm? How can we reach Affinity's firm? Here I'm sharing our screen. You have our contact information. Also, for those of you with your cell phone, feel free to scan this QR code. It'll send you directly to our YouTube page. We have videos coming out every Tuesday, so make sure you subscribe to Affinity's channel. We'll be posting this video within the next day or two. So if you want to go back and share it with your board members and be able to show them the information that you gained. From our behalf, I want to thank again Misha, his team, my team for putting this together. I also, more importantly, want to thank all the board members and all the managers that are here today. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to gain a little bit more knowledge, get a better understanding of how to manage your communities, how to better lead your communities as well. So I wanted to applaud you for that. Thank you all again for being here in today's webinar. We look forward to having you at our next one. And thank you again, Misha. Appreciate everything you and M2E do.
Rafael, thank you so very much for having us. It's a pleasure like always. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Stay safe.